Hi, this is Adam Armstrong from Specright. Appreciate everybody joining today's webinar, recapping the highlights and takeaways from our user group conference in January. We're going to kick off now. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them in the menu on the right side. If you have any issues with the phone connection, audio, or visual, please write that in the chat. Appreciate everybody joining, and before we jump into this, I just want to introduce Matthew Wright, our CEO and founder.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and hopefully the next 20-25 minutes will be educational, and we appreciate your participation with questions.
Perfect. So I'm going to start out with a little debrief on the event as a whole. It was an excellent group of attendees, a handful of sample attendee logos here, really enabled us to get perspectives from companies across all different industries that are using Specright and work with packaging and ingredients and raw materials. We had a pretty even split of longtime customers, recent customers, and potential Specright customers. So there were a number of people in the same shoes as all of you on the call. The event was a mix of presentations from Specright customers and Specright employees, as well as breakout groups. And we discussed everything from today's biggest supply chain challenges to what companies and individuals across different departments would most like in a specification software system. And, you know, I think across the board, the feedback that we got was that it was very informative and certainly engaging. We also had fun, which is always great in a setting like this, to be able to interact not only in the business setting, but also in a social setting. So I think, you know, we'll go into some detail on the presentations and obviously the meat of the user group, but overall it was an excellent event. So I'm going to pass it over to Matthew to talk a little bit about some major takeaways.
Yeah, we had very high expectations coming into the event. I think we planned and prepared well to give everybody great benefit from it. Probably the biggest takeaways, we had a very highly engaged group, extremely interactive. We tracked everybody in the audience, had questions, had participated throughout the day and throughout the events. So obviously everybody was coming together really with this Specright facilitating the meeting, trying to solve the everyday real business problems that we are jointly focused on. We packed a lot into one day. It was a full day. We did a lot of 20-minute modules to keep the pace and the rhythm well. We also had breakout sessions. We had clients speak, which we'll highlight some of that. And we also had technology, finance, and some other groups, as well as packaging schools participate. So it was a very interactive, very fast-paced, loaded agenda. And what was interesting is I think everybody that's on the call would agree is that everybody's looking for ways to increase and improve efficiency, and we're willing to share ways that they were doing that with Specright and perhaps other methods. So the fun part was really kind of the introduction that I kicked off with, and I use this photograph at times to try to explain the world of which I look at, that we can certainly clarify and help bring some solutions to people. And so when I spoke about specification data management, I talk about the ability for everyday workflows, changes, new employee training, efficiency gains, and et cetera, to be with today's environment, with data kind of in disparate different systems. And really, as I speak about specification data management and the ability of Specright is I want to bring a world that's got great clarity and consistency so that things can happen fast and be repetitive to everybody. And I think that resounds kind of with everybody's frustration perhaps on the left and everybody's desire on the right as a pictorial view of what Specright's trying to accomplish and what we believe our community of clients bring to the table in helping us get down that path. And then we talked also about, we're obviously starting with packaging. We're expanding the protective packaging. We're going into the inner packaging, obviously the labeling, the branding around that. But it goes beyond that. We're actually starting to create specification links that really give exposure to the whole environment. Everything that goes into, in this particular case, the soup, the raw materials, the ground that the raw materials are growing out of. A big area that we're now expanding into is packaging, setup equipment, and other materials and all the stuff that goes into that, and creating this linked spec world that allows great efficiency and change management to flow through that. So that resonated with the audience. There were several people in the audience that were using the system beyond packaging, so it was a great dialogue about the need for that. So if you wouldn't mind, Adam, just talk through some. We had one of the best parts is we had some of the clients that used the products. It wasn't just a selling environment. It was really a collaborative environment. We asked a couple clients to speak about their experience, which they're more than willing to do, and why don't you share some of those thoughts?
Definitely. Thank you, Matthew. And I think, this was a lot of what was the most interesting and engaging at the event. Was being able to see how different companies use Specright in different ways and passing on best practices. There was definitely a collaborative air, and a lot of the feedback that we got was that there were new ideas and ways to use the system that, for example, a chemicals company learned from a food and beverage company. And so I'll jump into a couple of those. So the first customer presenter we had was actually the MC for the event, Jason Higbee, who's the Director of Materials Management and leads procurement over at Grimmway Farms. And what was great about Jason's story and explanation is that he's been using Specright, and his team and company. Grimmway Farms is the largest carrot grower in the U.S., as well as one of the largest organic farmers. And for him to have kind of the story of how they used Specright initially up until now. So a handful of the highlights, the first was being able to use Specright first as a way to standardize and collect all their specifications. Matthew, I think you're going to touch on later a little bit on the onboarding and implementation best practices that were discussed, but a major benefit that many seem to see was just coming on board with Specright as a means to clean up, standardize, and normalize their packaging data. A second major benefit was centralizing all this information so that different departments and stakeholders internally that previously didn't have access to this data could find it easily, as well as sharing with suppliers. And then the last kind of initial benefit was around the annual audits that they do. And as Jason explained it, they send out on a periodic basis their sample of their specifications to their supplier base, and then the suppliers verify that the specification that Grimmway has matches reality. And this has proved to be a major benefit for both sides because they found some discrepancies that enabled the supplier to share those, and Grimmway was on board with the changes that were made, but then both were on the same page. Then as it moved to kind of the next stage in Grimmway's usage of Specright, I think the key was uncovering and sharing more data beyond kind of the basic structural and print specifications. So especially inventory KPIs and data being shared with their vendors so that the vendors can be more on the same page, and as he said here, encourage vendor managed replenishment. In terms of the future of Grimmway with Specright, there's a number of areas that Jason and his team are looking to go into, some that other Specright customers are already using, but really kind of goes with the land and expand idea of starting with one group and expanding from there. The second presentation to highlight from a customer was Eric Slack, who's the packaging formulation representative for Dow AgroSciences. And I think the key point that Eric made is that when he was presenting Specright as an option to his business, was that it's not just the packaging engineers that benefit, even if those are the primary users. And so Eric really detailed how the benefits and use cases are unique for each department, but go beyond packaging engineering to artwork, regulatory management, supply chain, and then certainly purchasing and procurement. So for those of you on the webinar, definitely happy to answer more questions about those areas. But I think Eric's view of a more holistic benefit scenario across different Dow and DuPont departments was definitely well received. He also talked a little bit about having kind of two levels of a specification, and how going from a master spec to a individual subspecification took about 250 clicks in their previous SAP system, and that now with Specright, it was, maximum 2 to 3 clicks to get to any of those items. So it's really been a game changer in terms of time savings. The last kind of customer scenario to highlight was we had a great keynote on kind of complete bill of materials and ingredient management, and really looking at how some customers like J&J Snack Foods are taking Specright beyond just the packaging management. And in this complicated diagram, it shows how they're drilling all the way down to the line level production of ingredients, and have really leveraged and appreciated Specright's architecture in terms of being able to link from a master finished good or bill of materials out to their branch plants, down to their formulas and ingredients, and capturing all the key ingredient details such as allergens and nutrition flags, and then ultimately passing that over to their nutrition panel management system. So once again, definitely happy to field any questions at the end of the webinar or after on some of these specific customer use cases. With that, Matthew, I'll pass it back to you. I know that the group really enjoyed seeing some of the new product highlights, and maybe you can discuss in more detail.
Yeah, definitely. As we jump into them, we were able to highlight a handful of some of the new products either that are out or coming out. One of them was just our UI enhancement. One of the things that we are focused on is making the use of Specright incredibly intuitive, simple to figure out. My goal is, within 20 minutes on the system, people are doing work. And so our UI is going to enable that. Obviously, the UI is for any new clients, and then we're going back and changing that over for older clients. The supplier management tools that we're initiating, that we highlighted at the event, were the vendor lookup, which was kind of a cross-section of looking for a particular commodity by a region, what were some options to look for alternative suppliers. Perhaps if they have a new product launch of a packaging commodity, they don't know where to locate it, they'd have that availability. and then eventually talk a little bit about where that tool is going futuristic in terms of linking vendors and specs together as the client wants. So that was kind of fun. Talked about the supplier scorecard that's come out that we are measuring for kind of KPIs at the time and how that works. And once again, a one-to-many relationship, so you can slice and dice that down to supplier-based location to client-based location, all the way at kind of top level, top-line suppliers to corporation, and how that works. And so that's really on the supplier management side. We highlighted where we're going. And probably the one that's got the most interest and certainly a lot of energy around it is some of our products such as like Item Finder that brings in some analytical tools to help you do better with what you're doing. But obviously we can do standardized reporting with all the data in the system that allows you to make some great intelligent decisions. Then we build that in as we see people using it to like Item Finder, which helps us reduce SKU proliferation, helps you find things that you can clone, helps you find ways to consolidate specs. And really where we're going next is a continuation of that into kind of pre-planned, preemptive ways to save money and studying the data and providing that back to our clients in kind of an automated format. So it's a natural progression, and currently that's kind of Specright driven. We're listening to some customer scenarios. Can you help us understand how to look for this, to add or provide alternative options? And then we're also looking at third party kind of intelligence, people that have other great ideas, how to save cost and packaging and bringing that into the product. So a lot of dialogue, I say a lot of offline dialogue about IQ at the breakouts and the dinners that we had. Then the other conversation that I think is near and dear to everybody is, how do we make this transition? As Adam, you mentioned that we had clients that have been around for a while. What's really cool is our, what I'd say, longer term clients are still onboarding because they're finding other stuff to put on the system. Certainly our new clients are in the process of onboarding, and a lot of questions from potential clients about how do we make that data transfer faster and better. And we've enabled tools, and we're sharing that, and a lot of clients that are going through this with us right now are great speakers and allies to the people considering it, is how easy that process is today, given the complexity, the tools that we're using to pull that data, scrape the data, the teams that we have built around that, and to really make sure that data is clean coming in, and then some of the tools that we're using and some of the tools we're building out for the future. So onboarding is a big discussion because that's obviously, you get started, and the other kind of cool part of the dialogue is that the clients that were in the process of onboarding were already able to use the tool while the onboarding process was in full swing, not waiting for some big event day to happen. And so a lot of dialogue around that and sharing. So perhaps we had some great breakouts, talked about supply chain issues, how Specright might fit supply chain issues. 4 great group breakout sessions that lasted for a couple of modules. Love for you, Adam, to talk a little bit about what we learned from those.
Yeah, definitely. And, there are 5 kind of ideas that came out that we're going to highlight here, but there were certainly many more across all departments and roles and industries. What I think was most fascinating was hearing different customers and potential customers speak about ways that they would like to use Specright or a problem they're having with their supply chain, and then others, kind of raising their hands and nodding along and say, oh yeah, it really helped us to have a claim checker as well, or we're having truck optimization issues. If that could be integrated into Specright, that would be a major benefit. So, just to touch briefly on these 5, and some of these we already have in the works, and the key follow-up from the user group is that now our product development team will spend more resources and focus further on these kind of issues that are nearest and dearest. But certainly the supplier and customer continuous feedback loop, the ability to have that kind of real-time interaction back and forth And I think, Matthew, you can definitely elaborate on any of these.
Yeah, I think the key is that this is important is that we're on version 32. We are completely collaborative with our client base and understanding where their needs are and trying to match our solution to those needs. And so for us, this was very valuable. We spent a lot of time. Obviously, the notes are a lot deeper than this, but we're coordinating those to either products that we haven't exposed well enough, or perhaps net new products that we need to come out with to meet today's needs of our clients. And it's really the culture of the company is we believe we know a fair amount and we've got some great resources, but we think we can get better with our clients' input, and this was extremely valuable for us.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that, something that you said very early on in Specright's history and has held true, Matthew, is trying to remove all the inefficiency that happens. And if you look at a few of these ideas, really trying to achieve economies of scale so that when procurement departments are buying, 100,000 bags of one type and there's 6 other very similar bags they could be buying at the same time and get a reduction in price and improve efficiency for everybody, enabling a system alert for that. Same thing with supplier data entry. We have a number of customers that are now doing this, but if the individual or the group that's making the packaging in the first place and creating the spec, if they're going to have to put the data somewhere, might as well put it in Specright initially and kind of eliminate that double entry. The last thing that I think would help to touch on, Matthew, before getting into a few questions is your closing comments got a lot of positive attention. Can you detail a little bit of what you talked about with the future vision?
So that was really kind of exciting, brought the event to a great close, and I thought great participation and kind of applause as we wrapped up the day, and really spoke to the ability for us to create this common platform of which all these wonderful brands are participating in will lead us to a point that people can have a self-serve model of sharing data as they see appropriate, both a give and take relationship, and that would impact stuff such as sustainability, cost, international information sharing, obviously resource design sharing. All these things now will be enabled as we look forward to a global product in the future. And I think that met with great resound and really kind of fit the event, because that's what the event was sharing challenges and opportunities and ways to do things better to improve everybody's efficiency and reduce cost. So it's a great, I think, wrap up for the day as we ended the day.
Very good. With that, I'm going to open up some of the questions that have come through as you've been speaking, and definitely feel free, anybody, to add any other questions that you have. The first one is, will a replay be available to share with coworkers? Certainly. So we will have a copy of the video that we'll share within the next day with you, and you can certainly send that around. The second question, and I'll let you take this one, Matthew, is, do you have any planned events in my local region?
Yeah, no doubt. I think once a year is kind of a long time period to wait. We felt there was such a great energy around this user group. It was our first user group. Based upon that success, we are looking at doing some geographically local throughout the year events. In addition to that, we obviously are doing what I call cluster visits. So we're visiting a group of customers in Chicago or New York or Dallas. So one of two options in the interim is those cluster visits to see if in those areas might do a more regional formal. Our next big event is obviously coming up here in I guess it's several months, the PAC Expo at Chicago. We'll have obviously a presence there, and then we'll definitely be doing another users group in January. And we expect to triple probably the audience at that point.
Awesome. I like the enthusiasm and goal of tripling it. I think we can certainly do that. Question came in on onboarding best practices. So I know you talked about the tools a little bit, but can you elaborate at all on kind of what companies are doing to overcome the hurdle of getting their specs on the system?
Yeah, and obviously in light of time, I'll make it really succinct. We've come a long ways. It's amazing to look at the first couple of customers and the challenges that we had in doing that. And I think we just, as the product, we continue to learn, bring best practices to the table. And really the key is that upfront kind of interaction meeting that we have. We'll kick off with the implementation team. But I'd say that really the big event today is the heavy reliance on the vendor community and the willingness of the vendor community to do that, and the cleansing of that data with some tools we have as that comes in. And we're seeing these massive migrations from despondent systems in pretty quick time frames today. So that's an area that we're focused on, and certainly seeing things get much better.
Excellent. Well, if anybody has any other questions, definitely feel free to send them in, or you can email anything to Matthew at Specright.com. Definitely appreciate everybody joining today. As I said, we will share around a video of the webinar along with this presentation. And I think the biggest takeaway that I had, and Matthew, I'll let you wrap it up, was how much each of these individuals at various companies, how their problems are different but all the same, and looking at how Specright's evolved over the last few years to kind of encompass all those problems. So I would certainly encourage anybody that's on the webinar, if there's anything we didn't cover today that you're interested in regarding Specright, or you want to dig into more detail on something, please do reach out.
No, I think the community effect of the user group and really the collaborative desire to increase efficiency is the takeaway. And we look forward to facilitating that for everybody involved. So thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it.